Сакат да лажат, но малку не беше баш, бидејќи ние ќе зборуваме само, кога зборуваме за Aco Šopov, ќе зборуваме само на англиски, а потоа ќе читаме поезија, ќе читаме 4 поеми, песни. Првите 3 ќе читаме и на македонски и на англиски, а последната песна само на англиски, бидејќи е подолга. So now that we've gotten some housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to begin, first of all, off script. I was just told that this is the eve of St. Clement's Day. And my students and those who know me know that Sveti Clement holds a special place in my language pedagogy, because Sveti Clement is really the start of so many things. And when I think of Macedonia, I don't think of warriors. I think of Sveti Clement, who brought enlightenment, medicine, language. That Sveti Clement of Ohrid is very special. And I was honored when the icon painter of your church presented me through my students with an icon of Sveti Clement. So I wish you all a Sveti Den za Sveti Clement. So now I'm going to take you back to a place you don't want to go, namely to 2020. During the first years of the pandemic, here and around the world, people were shut in, lives were lost, dreams and aspirations suspended, projects and plans delayed. Into this strange, disorienting, and static world of lockdown in Toronto stepped Yasmina Šopova. On August 13th, 2020, the first year of the pandemic, I received an email from Yasmina Šopova in which she proposed that we meet online to discuss a translation project for the 100th year anniversary of the birth of her father, the Macedonian poet Aco Šopov. His birthday is coming up later this month. I told her that despite my knowledge of Macedonian and wide-ranging reading of poetry, I did not have the skills needed to translate it. I suggested she contact Rawley Grau, whom, as you've learned, I've known for more than 30 years, and whose translations of the great Russian 19th century poet Yevgeny Baratynsky I had greatly admired. In September, Yasmina wrote to me that she had read Rawley's work, been very impressed by it, and she would contact him. But first she asked whether I would be willing to work with him since, as she said, he's going to have to work with someone. We agreed to experiment with a collaborative translation of several poems to see if it would work. What you will hear today is some of the poems in the newly released volume, The Long Coming of the Fire. Here we will tell you about the life and times of Aco Šopov and his remarkable poetic legacy. And we will tell you how these translations came to life.
In the poem, An Event by the Lake, Nastan na Ezerskiot Breg, Aco Šopov tells the story of a winged horse that after traveling the world returns exhausted to his native land to be restored, or to his native lake actually, to be restored by its clear and health-giving water. The people watching him question whether there was any point to this journey. But for the horse, we are told, it was the highest purpose of his life to discover his native land by discovering the world. At the end of the poem, the horse regains his strength by diving into the lake and flies off again, carrying with him his highest purpose, to discover his native land and so discover the world. Šopov wrote this poem in the early 1970s when he was already one of the most celebrated poets in his native Macedonia, then part of Yugoslavia. At the time, he was serving as the Yugoslav ambassador to Senegal, the first time he had lived for an extended period in a place so different from his own country. So the reciprocal discovery he talks about, to find one's homeland in the world and to find the world in one's homeland is all the more striking. While it bears witness to the poet's deep connection with all of humanity, regardless of continent, race, climate, or history, it also seems an apt metaphor for Shopov's own poetic mission to develop a poetry rooted in his own ancient culture and language that is simultaneously universal and modern, not by turning away from tradition, but by drawing on something at the core of both the traditional and the modern, some truth that is both of the moment and beyond the realm of time. Šopov came of age with Macedonian poetry and was at the heart of its maturation into a modern literature. After the standardization of the Macedonian literary language in 1944, writers building on Macedonia's long, primarily oral poetic tradition found a revitalized environment for creative expression, particularly in poetry. While earlier poets, such as the brothers Konstantin and Dimitar Miladinov, Grigor Perlichev, and especially Kocho Radzin, had laid the groundwork for a new literary verse, modern Macedonian poetry came into its own only after World War II with the works of Blažej Konevsky, Slavko Janevsky, and Aco Šopov.
Aco Šopov was born on December 20th, 1923, in the city of Štip in eastern Macedonia, which at the time was within the kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. Šopov's childhood was marked not only by the general poverty and regional turmoil, but also by family difficulties, in particular, the frequent absence of his psychologically troubled father, Georgi Zafirov Šopov, and the long, paralyzing illness of his mother, Kostadinka Rusheva, a school teacher who instilled in him a love of poetry. Aco was the middle of 3 sons, of whom the older had been sent to study at the Eastern Orthodox Seminary in Prizren, about 100 miles away. When their mother became paralyzed in 1934, it was left to 10-year-old Aco to care for both her and her younger brother. The poet would later refer to this period in his life as a 100-headed monster. Aco completed secondary school in Štip, where he became interested in the socialist movement. He had begun writing poetry at the age of 14, mournful, personal verses, but now turned to social themes and, with 2 other students, published the underground Macedonian language newspaper, Iskra, the Spark. In 1940, while still in secondary school, Šopov joined the League of Communist Youth of Yugoslavia. In early April the following year, Germany invaded Yugoslavia, which quickly surrendered and was partitioned yet again, with most of Macedonia annexed to Bulgaria. Šopov's mother died in 1942, and in fall 1943, he joined the anti-fascist Macedonian armed resistance, fighting to liberate Macedonia from the Bulgarian occupation. Šopov continued writing poetry as a partisan combatant and served as literary editor and editor of and contributor to Ogen, Fire, the newspaper of the 3rd Macedonian Shock Brigade. In fall 1944, his first poetry collection, Pesni, Poems, was printed by the Underground Press. This was the first Macedonian book to be published on liberated territory. In the years following the war, Šopov published 3 more books: Pruga na Mladost, Railway of Youth, 1946, with the poet Slavko Janevsky, as well as Na Gramos, On Gramos, and So naši race, With Our Hands, both in 1950. Works marked largely by reflections on the socialist revolution and national liberation. The last of these included the poem Oči, Eyes, dedicated to Šopov's partisan comrade and first love, Vera Jocic, who died after being wounded in battle. It remains one of Šopov's best-loved works and one that many Macedonians can recite, at least in part. Any of you here, Oči? Can you recite any of it? Yes, hands are going up. Thank you very much. In 1948, Tito broke with Stalin, which led to Yugoslavia's expulsion from the Communist Information Bureau. Among other momentous changes, this break signaled the beginning of the end of Soviet-style socialist realism as the only permitted doctrine in the arts. By the early 1950s, writers, artists, and others were allowed much greater freedom to make their own decisions about themes and styles, which opened the way to the modernist tendencies which would dominate Yugoslav culture well into the 1980s.
Šopov had been criticized already for diverging from socialist realism, at least since 1950, when he began publishing highly personal poems stemming from the breakup of his first marriage and his separation from his infant son. These poems were collected as Stihovi namakata I radosta, verses of suffering and joy, in 1952, and the turn from social topics to intimate themes sparked controversy in the Macedonian press. Šopov continued to develop this personal lyricism in his next two books. Slese so tišinata, Merge with the Silence, in 1955, and Vetrot nosi ubavo vreme, The Wind Carries Beautiful Weather, both of which, in 1957, both of which won Macedonia's Kocho Racine Prize for Poetry. Nebidnina, Not Being, appeared in 1963. This was another deeply personal collection in which many of the poems were inspired by his love for Svetlana Velkovska, whom he married in 1958. But as the title Nebidnina, Not Being, suggests, the personal expands into a broader, more philosophical dimension, in which healing love is related to something mysterious that transcends existence and lies at the very root of poetry. On the morning of July 26, 1963, the same year that Not Being was published, the city of Skopje, Macedonia's capital, was struck by a devastating earthquake. Over 1,000 people were killed, several thousand were injured, and over 100,000 were left homeless. Šopov responded to the disaster with some of his most powerful poems, which not only record the devastation, but also raise questions about the poet's own responsibility in the face of such tragedy. In 1970, he published Gledać vo pepelta, Reader of the Ashes, what may be considered, along with the volume Nebidnina, his masterwork. Both volumes are published in their entirety in our book. More than just a collection of new poems, this book, Gledać vo pepelta, Reader of the Ashes, this book is a clearly structured work with themes, images, and symbols that echo from poem to poem to create an energy and rhythm that draw the reader into its drama of suffering, love, and emergent meaning. Although many of the poems in this book can be read individually as reflecting the poet's personal struggles, when taken together, they build into something that is much more expansive. The fire is here beneath these mad waters, Šopov declares in the opening line of the poem, The Long Coming of the Fire. Restating this a few verses later as, the fire is here underneath this hide, and commanding us and himself, dig it up. The desire to reach some primordial, creative, and destructive force that is also deep within us, which was already present in Not Being, now in Reader of the Ashes, acquires new urgency and complexity. At the same time, the journey he expresses in both books is implicitly entwined with the turbulent history and destiny of his homeland.
By the early 1970s, Šopov was a towering figure on the literary scene. He had won several important awards for his works, including in 1970, Yugoslavia's highest honor in culture and science, the Avnoj Award. That same year, he received his third Kočoracin Prize for Reader of the Ashes. In 1967, he was named one of the first members of the Macedonian Academy of Sciences and Arts, and the following year was elected as a corresponding member of the Serbian Academy. Šopov was appointed as the Yugoslav ambassador to Senegal in 1971. Šopov's years in Africa from 1971 to 1975 had a substantial impact on his writing. The poet experienced a genuine connection with the peoples and cultures of West Africa. To some extent, this may have been due to Macedonia's own centuries-long history of oppression under foreign powers, but for Šopov it went deeper than that. In his African poems, Šopov's pursuit of that creative, destructive impulse which he expressed so powerfully in Reader of the Ashes and Not Being, becomes more richly expressed through his reflection on the commonality of human experience and his effort to understand and identify with the traumatic history of the Atlantic slave trade. It is in this context of trauma and revelation that Šopov expresses the idea in An Event by the Lake, which Rawley read earlier, that the discovery of the world and the discovery of one's native land are inextricably connected. Upon his return to Macedonia, Šopov published Pesna na crnata žena, the Song of the Black Woman, 1976, for which he received the Miladinov Brothers Award at the Struga Poetry Festival. In 1976, Šopov was appointed as the president of Macedonia's Commission for Foreign Cultural Relations. The following year, however, his declining health forced him to retire from public life. In 1981, Šopov published his last book, Scar, or Luzna, which brought together a large number of poems. Šopov made the selection himself with the intention that this book would represent his poetic legacy. It is this volume of Luzna, Scar, that inspired the selection translated in our volume, The Long Coming of the Fire, with selections made in consultation with Jasmina Šopova. Šopov died on April 20th, 1982 at the age of 58, leaving behind his wife, Svetlana, and two children, Vladimir and Jasmina. We would like to shift now to give you some sense of our work as co-translators, and then we'll be happy after we read a few poems to take some questions. So you have to understand that when we began our translation of the poetry, neither of us had much experience with collaborative translation, nor were we familiar with Šopov. Rawley, in fact, although an experienced translator of Russian and Slovenian poetry, was just beginning to learn Macedonian. So we began tentatively taking our first steps in a kind of fog that is, as Jasmina put it, both frightening and exciting. But we soon developed a good working process. I am, as many of you know, a linguist and an experienced translator of Macedonian prose. I would send Rawley the poem in 3 versions: the original Macedonian with marked stresses, an interlinear translation noting linguistic details about particular words and significant cultural references, and a first, more or less, literal translation. From this material, Rawley created a draft in which he sought to capture the poetry of the original, rhythm, rhyme scheme, imagery, while preserving its meaning. We sent our drafts back and forth with questions and comments as we revisited our decisions, often with input from native speakers, until we eventually settled on a near-final version, which we then sent to Jasmina, who responded with insights, comments, and corrections. As we became more familiar with Šopov's work, noticing especially his development of images and ideas across books and over decades, we revised our earlier translations to make these connections clearer. We came to realize that Šopov had created a remarkably coherent conceptual system, a poetic universe, and that it was essential to convey this in our translations. I like to think that I was sort of those little gnomes going out and sweeping the hay into the middle of the barn, and Rawley would then spin it into gold.
I don't think Šopov would ever have used that metaphor. A salient example of how understanding the broader frame of Šopov's work over many books and several decades is the way that we handled the Macedonian word pesna, which might seem a very easy word to translate. But in fact, it can mean either a song, something that is sung, or a poem, something that is read. This is a key word for Šopov, who at times even addresses the pesna directly, as in Reader of the Ashes, the poem Reader of the Ashes, one of the first things that we translated, in fact. The poem opens with the word izgasni pesno, burn out pesna. Since, at the time we were first translating this, it seemed likely that the poet could be addressing the very poem he was writing, or maybe hoped to write, we initially translated this as burn out poem. But later, it became clear that Šopov's notion of pesna transcended any individual poem or even the idea of a poem as something in modern writing, modern literature. It was instead connected with something from the beginning of time, and also seemed to relate to both the folk song tradition of Macedonia, which in one poem, the White Sorrow of the Spring, he refers to as the song of old, and the mysterious female figure that appears in Not Being. In the poem Black Sun, Crno Sonce, for example, the poet exclaims, "O pesna, land, woman, O life and death at once, whatever you bring me today, I will thirstily drink up." So with this in mind, we went back to earlier translations and in most cases changed what we had translated as poem to song. Unlike the usual single translator process where decisions are largely intuitive, our back and forth dialogue forced us to articulate the reasons behind our choices. We thus alerted each other to possible overinterpretations that departed from the poet's actual meaning, or, on the contrary, overly precise renderings that failed to capture the spirit of the line. We learned to be content with ambiguity. Our translation then, while striving for precision, also had to allow for openness. To borrow one of Šopov's own images, his poems create nets of meaning in which golden fish are dreaming. And as translators, we had to capture not just the chords of the nets, but also the spaces between them. We are honored to be able to present the poems of this modernist master to the English-speaking world, and we can only hope that something of Šopov's fire burns in our translations.
So if you get the book, some of what we spoke about here is in the introduction that we wrote, but the introduction is also quite a bit more detailed, and we give much more examples of things that we were thinking about as we were translating, and some of those things might come up in a question later on after we read. If you're wondering, how are you still talking to each other after translating all these poems? The other decision we made is that neither of us like footnotes in the middle of a poem. And we don't even like little numbers next to a poem. And so if you get the book and questions arise, you might want to first look. We have notes in the back on some difficult things, some things about the poet, but we did not leave footnotes to let you know where those are. So if you're curious, have a look, but the poems are intended to be read without all that clutter around it. So that was the editorial decision we made. So we're now going to read 4 poems for you. The first three, Hunt on the Lake, Tempest, and Birth of the Word, will present in Macedonian and English, as I said. I will read the Macedonian, then Rawley will read the English, and then we'll end with a reading in English of The Long Coming of the Fire, with us taking turns reading the 8 stanzas. So we're going to begin by going to an early poem, Hunt on the Lake, from the collection Sleso Tishinata, Merged with the Silence of 1955. Last month, I was asked to speak about translation in Japan, and I picked this poem because the poem felt to me like it had something of the haiku in it. And Aco Šopov was writing a number of miniatures. He was interested by Eastern poetry, so we hope some of that is carried through here. Lov na jezero. Ptica ustremena, strvnina, ispraven nur so zakana, glune ezerska povrvdina, modra od taga isplakana. Темни от удар на крилото, темно ја сече модрината, блеснува на студенилото, рибата в клунот раскината. Денот е сив од умирање, сами сме, ништо не велиме, некоја немо разбирање, не гони да се разделиме.
Hunt on the lake. A bird, eyes fixed, hunger. A cormorant, erect with threat. Utterly still the lake's surface, blue from sorrow wept. The dark beat of the wings darkly cleaves the blue. In the bill, the slashed fish flashes in the cold. The day is gray with dying. We're alone. We don't say a word. A certain mute understanding is driving us apart.
So we're going to move ahead now to 1970 from Gledachvo Pepelta, Reader of the Ashes. Get over here. To read you a poem that was rather tricky to translate. Here we go. Nevreme. Kako me nosi rekata, kako me frla od jedno do drugo jezero, od jedna do druga žed. Najsudbonosno pejan ribite so nemi grla, tije što večno kružat ko voden sončogled. Slezi dolu poskalite na ova kula, raspreta ja žarta pod krilata na vodната птица, Бранот, најмалиот свет, сите векови таму ги лула и талка огромни сеништа од некои дамнешни лица. Рика утробата, ко густо небо се кавица ја кине, светот се корне, пукаат старите оски и се урива, се пропаѓа и гине пред црните на бранот, како пред расцутени боски. Плачи водо, завивај утробо, завивај кугло запалена. Времето не време, вистинско е време. Под тебе земјата лежи од умора премалена и црн конјаник иде, плодот да си го земе.
tempest. How the river carries me, how it tosses me along from one lake to another, one thirst to another. With silent throats, the fish incant a vatic song, they who circle endlessly like a sunflower of water. Go from this tower, descend the stair, stoke the embers beneath the wings of the water bird. The smallest blossoms ripple, rocks all the centuries there, and moves the looming shadows of faces long departed. The depths of the earth roar like dense cloud rent by lightning. The world is uprooted, the old axles crack with doom. All is shattered, collapsing, everything is dying before the deer on the wave, as before breasts in bloom. Weep, water, depths, wail, wail, planet ablaze. Weather that rages is weather in truth. Beneath you the earth lies exhausted and dazed, and a dark horseman comes to gather his fruit.
So the last one we're going to do bilingually is from 1963, Nebidnina, not being. And before I begin, this is the 60th anniversary of the earthquake, and I just wanted to pause and recall that Šopov also wrote a beautiful essay about the earthquake, and it was a really seminal event in the life of him and, of course, the other poets and people of the city. This poem is probably Šopov's most widely anthologized poem. Ragjanje na zborot. Glušt na glušt. Kamen vrz kamen. Kamena šuma iz zemljina. Glušt na glušt. Kamen vrz kamen. Od kamen I nije obata. Čadi nokta. Zborot se dvoji od temninata. Modar jaglen mu gori vo utrovata. O ti što postojiš, zašto ne postojiš? Nebo to golulaš, zemljata ja vrtiš. O ti što postojiš, zašto ne postojiš? Zemljata jači pod kameni pločnici. Ide zamelušen od svojite smrti, zborot što gi krši site slepoočnici. Glušt na glušt, kamen vrz kamen. Svoj grob so prokuda go kopam. Odvori me prokletio, ti tvrdino kamena, da izgoram vo jaglenot na zborot, da se stopam.
Birth of the word, gnarl upon gnarl, stone upon stone, stone forest, frozen solidness. Gnarl upon gnarl, stone upon stone, stone too, the both of us. Smoke rises in the night. The word separates from the darkness. Blue coal burning in its bowels. O you who exist because you do not exist. You shake the sky, you spin the earth. O you who exist because you do not exist. The earth groans beneath stone plates. Dazed from its dyings, the word comes forth, the word that splinters all our temples, gnarl upon gnarl, stone upon stone. Out of bad habit I dig my grave. Open me, accursed one, you fortress of stone, that I may burn in the coals of the word and melt away.
So the title of the book, The Long Coming of the Fire, which when Rawley and I talked about various titles for the book, and I get an email from Rawley saying, The Long Coming of the Fire. It's like, oh man, okay, that's it, we're done here. Šopov wrote a number of poetry cycles. Nebidnina has, the prayer cycle is in Nebidnina, has a cycle of poems, prayers to the body. In Reader of the Ashes, there was a series of 3 poems about the fire, and whether that fire is creative impulse, whether that fire is passion, whether that fire is something that we need to dig out of ourselves and also somehow get from the universe. The cycle of poems, if you get the book, gather your people around, say we're going to read the cycle of poems out loud. We don't have time to read all of the cycle. That's what we would get together on Zoom, and we would read the poems in cycles out loud. I would read them to Rawley in Macedonian, and Rawley would read our translations so we could hear acoustically what was happening. But the poem, the fire cycle, begins with Prometheus coming. First there is no fire, and then Prometheus is going to come and steal the fire. And we're waiting and there's no fire, and then we have the long coming of the fire. And this then is the last of the cycle, which he wrote later, and this was his public address on when you become a member of the Macedonian Academy of Arts and Sciences, you have to give a public address. And for Aco Šopov, that address was this poem. I thought I had this all beautifully done, but no. So again, it is 8 verses. So we're going to go back and forth verse to verse. So we're not going to announce verse 1, verse 2. You're going to know it's a new verse because we're going to switch back and forth. The long coming of the fire. The fire is here, beneath these mad waters, beneath this limestone and self-sowing evil. Beneath these waters, heavy and ripened, 3 black boundaries blackly divide them. Beneath this wreath from sunheads wrought, beneath this wave choking on rocks, beneath this thunder sworn oaths and malice, and this tree on the bank with its age-old menace. The fire is here, underneath this hide, beneath these 3 boundaries, these 3 knives, always and everywhere, all-powerful and weary, a star in the heart and in the root, darkness. Dig it up.
From headspring to delta, from fist to cross, from underground to frozen ground, from brother to brute, from glow to gallows, from word to sword. Dig it up.
Here you will never dig it up. See how it's fused to the ancient beech tree? It rocks in a cradle between 3 trees. In every poppy, a red wind blows. It's the warrior in an icon in an old church. It's a long vanished speech in search of itself. See how it kneels like a beggar enraptured as it gouges its word in the carving for an altar. Dig into yourself, beneath your own hide, beneath the 3 scars, beneath the 3 knives.
Dig it up, from villages to cinders, from breast to bone, from God to hawthorn, from harvest to curse, from mark to lament, from scabbard to revolt. Dig it up.
Never will you dig it up, not with wild thieving. The dead are not dead, and the living not living. For them, the cross was light, but not light the ashes. The dead will only die the day their song passes. For the dead who lie there, the grave is not heavy, but the songs that they sing weigh hard on the living. Here, long though you live, you won't dig up the fire. It is that saint who bursts from the icon. It is that stone where the dead make their pillow, that starry feast, that health and that illness. It is that magic, that wonder-working blood which repairs your wounds and severs your head. Dig beneath your scars, beneath the knife that serves you. In your eyes, the fire blazes with the rose's insurgence.
Dig it up. The rivers will utter their final vow and then run dry and cease to flow. The heavens will come crashing down, the mountains will tumble, deserts will rain. Stars will mix with beasts, toxins with tillage, and none will know who is dead and who is living. Dig it up.
As you dig beneath you, it will appear above you and place a death's head upon your shoulder. The fire will carry you blinded through secret realms, and where or who or what you are, you will not ask yourself. It is here, in this root, in this silence which shines, and yet its own light it never will sense. It hangs with every dead body on every tree. This is us, this is you, this is me. And if it seems in such form like a voice fading out, it will call to you again from a distant height.
Dig into yourself, beneath your own hide, beneath the black sun of the 3 knives. The fire is here, beneath these waters gone mad, in this hungry womb which bears a hungry word. But it also can tame the wild beast in his den. It can rend and crush and kill and join. With it, beauty is added to the beauty of the flower. Without it, the world is an entire world poorer. For us, the cross is light, but the ashes no light thing. The dead will die with us, and with the song we sing.
Thank you. So we're going to go back and forth verse to verse, so we're not going to announce verse 1, verse 2. You're going to know it's a new verse because we're going to switch back and forth. the long coming of the fire. The fire is here, beneath these mad waters, beneath this limestone and self-sowing evil. Beneath these waters, heavy and ripened, 3 black boundaries blackly divide them. Beneath this wreath from sunheads wrought, beneath this wave choking on rocks, beneath this thunder sworn oaths and malice, and this tree on the bank with its age-old menace. The fire is here, underneath this hide, beneath these 3 boundaries, these 3 knives, always and everywhere, all-powerful and weary, a star in the heart and in the root, darkness. Dig it up.
From headspring to delta, from fist to cross, from underground to frozen ground, from brother to brute, from glow to gallows, from word to sword. Dig it up.
Here, you will never dig it up. See how it's fused to the ancient beech tree? It rocks in a cradle between 3 trees. In every poppy, a red wind blows. It's the warrior in an icon in an old church. It's a long vanished speech in search of itself. See how it kneels like a beggar enraptured as it gouges its word in the carving for an altar. Dig into yourself, beneath your own hide, beneath the 3 scars, beneath the 3 knives.
Dig it up. From villages to cinders, from breast to bone, from God to hawthorn, from harvest to curse, from mark to lament, from scabbard to revolt. Dig it up.
Never will you dig it up, not with wild thieving. The dead are not dead, and the living not living. For them, the cross was light, but not light the ashes. The dead will only die the day their song passes. For the dead who lie there, the grave is not heavy, but the songs that they sing weigh hard on the living. Here, long though you live, you won't dig up the fire. It is that saint who bursts from the icon. It is that stone where the dead make their pillow, that starry feast, that health and that illness. It is that magic, that wonder-working blood which repairs your wounds and severs your head. Dig beneath your scars, beneath the knife that serves you. In your eyes the fire blazes with the rose's insurgence.
Dig it up. The rivers will utter their final vow, and then run dry and cease to flow. The heavens will come crashing down, the mountains will tumble, deserts will rain. Stars will mix with beasts, toxins with tillage, and none will know who is dead and who is living. Dig it up.
As you dig beneath you, it will appear above you and place a death's head upon your shoulder. The fire will carry you blinded through secret realms, and where or who or what you are, you will not ask yourself. It is here, in this root, in this silence which shines, and yet its own light it never will sense. It hangs with every dead body on every tree. This is us, this is you, this is me. And if it seems in such form like a voice fading out, it will call to you again from a distant height.
Dig into yourself, beneath your own hide, beneath the black sun of the 3 knives. The fire is here, beneath these waters gone mad, in this hungry womb which bears a hungry word. But it also can tame the wild beast in his den. It can rend and crush and kill and join. With it, beauty is added to the beauty of the flower. Without it, the world is an entire world poorer. For us, the cross is light, but the ashes no light thing. The dead will die with us, and with the song we sing.
Ptica ustremena, strvnina, ispraven nor so zakana, glune ezerska povrvina, modra od taga isplakana. Темни от удар на крилото, темно ја сече модрината, блеснува на студенилото, рибата в клунот раскината. Денот е сив од умирање, сами сме, ништо не велиме. Некоја немо разбирање не гони да се разделиме.
Hunt on the lake. A bird, eyes fixed, hunger. A cormorant, erect with threat. Utterly still the lake's surface, blue from sorrow wept. The dark beat of the wings darkly cleaves the blue. In the bill, the slashed fish flashes in the cold. The day is gray with dying. We are alone. We don't say a word. A certain mute understanding is driving us apart.
Thank you to our 2 co-translators. Absolutely magnificent, magnificent. Thank you so much.